teacher.
Right. They never get up.
But if there's no kids in school,
They still have to show up. Doesn't stop.
They work all summer.
Hmm.
They work all summer.
Yeah.
It's a volunteer.
it really is. That's why they're. Oh, and pushing everybody to come.
We'll get started. Thanks to the host.
Let them hear it.
Jeremy, thanks to the host for hosting this. Really nice. And Talmud Torah. I mean, you get a whole bunch of it. Pile them up.
Thank you for coming.
Today we have a nice sugya here at the end of Yevamot. So we'll have one more shiur in the Yevamot, and then we move on to Ksubas, which is the next set. And by way of introduction, what we're going to deal with is the question of Chatan. It's going to be relevant to also a Cheresh and a Shoter, because those three are together, and they form a group which is called Lav B'nei Dagan, meaning they don't have what's called Das. Das is a halakhic concept, has nothing to do with intellectual prowess. And Chazal established that if a Chatan is involved in an Avera, then we have to study this very carefully. Is it a responsibility on our part? And when I say our part, you see that the language of the Shach is based in Mitzuvim lahafrisha. We have to see to it that he is separated from Esau, that he should not be violating Esau. I remember many years ago, I took my kids, they were very young at that time, to Orlando, and it was so hot in the summer, in the park, and my daughter wanted ice cream. Now, there was one ice cream that was kosher, but it was very hard to get it at that time. Today, I think it's... So what we did was we let her eat the ice cream. Now, here's the question. Are you allowed to let your child eat something that's prohibited? And that's really this sugya here in Masechet Yevamot. Now, the name of the perek is Cheresh Shenosav Kachas. And that's where we're going to jump into. We start with the Mishnah, and then we go to the Gemara, and the Gemara is going to analyze this Mishnah. What happens in this Mishnah is very interesting. A woman falls for Yibum, but the problem is that the Yavam is married to her sister. And that's one of the 15 arayos, which are listed in the first Mishnah in Yevamot, that completely undermine Yibum. So there's no Yibum in the case of an Arab. Now, a man is not allowed to marry the sister of his wife. That's called achos ishta. Now, he's married to the sister of the Yavam. However, his wife is a chereshes. Now, watch what happens in this case. We have two problems, all of which are related to achos ishta. One is the Yavama herself, who falls for Yibum. She has an isur of achos ishta because he's married to her sister. Now, as far as the chereshes herself is concerned, so there too we have a problem, and that's called achos zikukasa. Meaning, when a woman falls for Yibum, the halacha views it as if it's a quasi-ish, as if they're married. They're not really married yet, but as a result, he cannot be married to a sister, but he's already married to a sister. So here's a case where a person is married to a chereshes, and we'll explain why that's so significant here, and her sister falls for him to Yibum. He can't remain married to her, to his own wife, who's a chereshes, because she is now achos zikukasa. She is the sister of a woman who fell to him for Yibum. So you have two brothers married to two sisters. I don't know in your experience, I don't know if that's common or not. In my experience, it's quite common. In fact, I don't know if anyone here knows a family called Paz. Yeah, three brothers married three sisters. Straight out of Masechet Yevamot. And these things happen. So that now, when the sister falls for Yibum, he can't remain married to his wife, who's a Chereshet, because she is a Chos Kukosim. And the Gemara therefore establishes, based on the mission here at the beginning of the Perek, that he has to divorce his wife. Now, on the other hand, he can't be Miyabim, the Eishes Achiv, who falls for Yibum, because she's Achos Ishto. So there's no one he could end up with. He's really in trouble. And not only that, even if he would go ahead and marry Achos Ishto, he can't divorce her because he's a Cherish, and a Cherish doesn't have das for Gerish. But the most important point that we have to take out of this for our study today is that this man is going to be required to divorce his wife who's a Chereshes. And the reason for that is because she's Achos Zikukaso. And now the Gemara is going to raise the following question. We'll see it inside in just a minute. Tesev Tachte, why not let the marriage go on? After all, he's a Cherish. And a Cherish is like a Katan or a he's Potem in a mitzvahs. Now again, it's important to mention, this is like a footnote on the side, who is a Cherish? Speak a little louder. Mm-hmm. That was a joke, nobody laughed. Anyway, who's a Cherish?
Can't speak for.
Excellent. He's not only deaf, but he's also mute. So he's a Cherish and Yachol Shmoav and Yachol Daber. He is mute. And his category is that he's Potem in a mitzvahs, he's exempt from all mitzvahs, and he's a Lavar Das. The Rabbanan recognized his Kedushin on a Rabbanan level, and that's Ishus the Rabbanan, in order to give him a life, meaning that so that he could be married. However, in this particular case, where his own wife is now a Achos Kukas, he's got to divorce. He has no other option other than to divorce. So the Gemara asks the obvious question: Cherish has the same status as a couple. And therefore, even if there'd be a violation of the Isur Achos Kukaso, if they had intimate relations, well, what difference does it make? He's a Cherish. So let's see this inside. This is going to be, I don't know if any of you were able to look at the Marmakomas page, but if you were, then you would have seen a Gemara, which is the second source on my page, Kuf Yud Dalet Amud Beis, and the Gemara asks the following question: Amai Motzias Ishto Beget. Why does he have to divorce his wife? He's a Cherish. Tesiv Gabei. Let her remain married to him, and if he has relations, which he will, Katan Ochel Levelos. That's a catchphrase. Katan Ochel Levelos. Cherish has a status with Katan. His relations with his wife now as Achos Kukaso is going to be that of Nevela. Nevela means a violation of an Isur. And what do we care? And now the Gemara wants to prove here from this particular Mishnah that Katan Ochel Nevelos Bezdin Mitzuvin Olav Lafrisha. That we have to separate this Cherish as a Katan from Isurim. Getting back to my structure, my model, she's eating non-kosher ice cream. I have to make sure that she stops, desist, and terminate that Isur because she's a Katan Ochel Nevelos. So we now conclude from our mission in Yevamos that Katan Ochel Nevelos Bezdin Mitzuvin Olav Lafrisha. Otherwise, why not let him remain married to Achos Kukaso? And he's a Cherish, who has the same status as we said as a Katan. So the Gemara finds a technical way of rejecting this proof, and that is, the Gemara says, Mishum Isura Dida. She's a Pikachas. So she's Chayeves b'mitzvos. Now, every time she has a relationship with her husband who's a Cherish, she's in violation of an Isur Achos Kukaso. Achos Kukaso is a two-way street, whether it's him as the Boel or her as the Nevelis. And as far as she's concerned, she's a Pikacha, she's a Gedola, she's obligated all the mitzvahs. And therefore, the reason why we can't allow this marriage relationship to continue is not because of him. As far as he's concerned, he's a cheresh and ain't bezin mitzvah olam lafrisha. We don't have to care about it. But we have a problem of her. She is a gdola pikachas, and we can't allow that relationship to continue. Now the Gemara makes
otherwise we wouldn't say.
Correct. That's what seems to be. But again, that's how the Gemara is defending that position of ein bezdin mitzvah lafrisha. Right? The Gemara has to defend every position here because we want to leave it as what's called an ibaya de lo ifshat, an unanswered question. So in order to deflect your proof, I'm going to say, no, the reason why we have to terminate this marriage is because of her, she's a pikachas gedola, and not because of him, he's a cheresh, and we couldn't care less. Ain't bezdin mitzvah lafrisha. But that's only a way of deflecting it. And in fact, the Gemara is going to prove from 3 different drushos that we're not going to allow a katan to eat the vegetable.
What would happen if
Ellie,
she was
right?
also? What happens if she was also?
Next.
Then the Gemara is saying that would be okay. If he's a cheresh and she's a chereshes, was up it, let it go on. Why? Because then we're in a situation of ein bezdin mitzvah lafrisha. We can't go into that much.
Then the Gemara concludes shouldn't for other reasons. They were
Right,
our side.
Xera. Right. We're not going to go into the Xera. We're focused now on bezdin mitzvah lafrisha. So the Gemara here on the bottom of Kuf Yud Daled Omen Aleph. Again, if you happen to have the source pages, I don't assume that you do necessarily, but you can look at it on your phone perhaps. This is the Gemara on Kuf Yud Daled Omen Aleph on the bottom of the Omen. And the Gemara says the following. Toshma, also given by Yirku Yud Aleph. Lo sochlum ki sheketz hem. This is the parsha of Shkotzim, those creeping creatures that were enjoined from eating. And the Torah says lo sochlum. Very strange. I think it's called in Digduk hispayel. It's like lahadlik, to cause someone. So who are you causing to eat the sheketz? Why didn't you say lo tochlu? What's lo tochlu? Lo tachilum. Don't feed them. Lahazir hagedolim alaktanim. That means that if I see a katan who's eating, okay, you have to go to Thailand for that, I suppose. But I have to separate him from eating the shkotzim. Why? Because the Torah says lo sochmum, lo sochimum, and you're not allowed to have him eat the shkotzim. So again, we're going to prove that kat nochel nevelos bezdin mitzvah lafrisha. So the Gemara says, lo. And the next few words are going to occupy us for the balance of the shiur. The lo leisfu le biyadayim. This is what's called in the literature iser sfia. Sfia means when I take the vela and I feed it to a katan. And the Gemara says if a katan on his own initiative takes the vela, again, the vela is a metaphor for all isurim, then it could be a bezdin mitzvah lafrisha. This pasuk in Shkotzim is telling me that I'm not allowed to feed a nevela sheretz to a katan. That's called the lo lisfi lubia diet. Do you see the difference? This is, for those who are interested in lumdus, like this could be a paradigmic case in the Talmud from which we can derive a methodology. There's a difference between passively allowing something to continue and actively changing the situation as it exists, altering the status quo. So in a case where the katan is eating a nevela sheretz on his own, we don't have to get involved according to this one. The Omar, ein bezdin mitzvah lafrisha. But to feed a katan, to actively set it up that he eats it, that we're not allowed to do. And the Gemara has another 2 limudim, another 2 psukim, again to try to prove that bezdin mitzvah lafrisha, tashma, pasuk vayikru chaf aleph, and mar v'amarta, at the beginning of Parshas Emor. So why the double language of mar v'amarta? Lahazir gedolim alaktanim. So we're talking about a Kohen who's not allowed to enter into a cemetery. And we derive from this pasuk that I have to be careful to make sure that if I'm a Kohen, to make sure that my son will not enter into a a cemetery. My love to Omar Lahu Lo Titfa'u. In other words, he's going to stop, he's going to prevent his son from doing what his son wants to do and come in contact with the corpse. Lo. The Lo Litvahu Biyadayim. The Isser here is because you took the katan and you brought him in contact with Tumah. You took him into the Beis HaKvaros. And again, the third limud, just give me one more minute so we'll see the whole thing. In the case of Dam, the Torah says the following. Well, I skipped Dam, sorry. And now the Gemara goes into a whole long discussion about why we needed 3 psukim in 3 different contexts of Isurim to teach me and establish lo lismu hu biyadayim. Yeah, go ahead, Ellie.
The Gemara's lashon lahazir doesn't necessarily lead you to the conclusion that lahazir is not a strong active. Lahazir would even cover the passive case. Interesting.
Correct. And the Havamina of the Gemara thought lahazir is even a passive case, where the cotton on his own initiative is entering into the cemetery. And the Gemara answers, no, lahazir means make sure that you don't cause your son to become tamid, because he's a Kohen no less than you are.
And then you get into gray area. Let's say you give your son money, and he chooses to use that money to buy the veil. Is that passive? Is he unknown? Are you the cause? Meaning,
This is going to be
proximate cause. Where's the line?
This is going to be the famous tshuva that Chassam Sofer. The Chassam Sofer will see it soon. Was asked the following question: this young boy is lo aleinu a shot. He really doesn't understand what's going on. So forth and so on. No one can handle this child, and he's going to deteriorate worse and worse. And the question was asked: there's one institution in the city of Wien, in Vienna at that time, where they do amazing things with these kind of children. Imagine, we're going back 170 years ago. It's so contemporary. The only problem with this institution, 2 sides of a coin, is number one, they only feed you treifas. And number 2, they won't let you bring in kosher. Now, I would have possibly right there. So anyway, the Chassam Sofer goes into this whole long discussion. Where does this case fit into? Is this a case of Bezdin Mitzubim Lafrisho? As if to say, it's the guy who's putting the nevela in front of the child. It's not me. And therefore, ain't Bezdin Mitzubim Lafrisho if we go according to that Mandion. Or no, is this a case of Lisfu Hulu Biyadayim? You're taking this child and enrolling the child in an institution knowing full well that he's going to be eating non-kosher food. So that's going to be that gray area. But right now we're talking about black and white. What's black and what's white? White is going to be the case where the child is entering into the cemetery and I can prevent it. That's Ein Bezdin Mitzubim Lafrish, according to that Monty Omar. And black is going to be a case where I take the child, and I drive him into the cemetery. And that's going to be Lo Liskulu Biyadayim. And we have 3 different Isurim in the Torah. We have Shkotzim, Dam, and Tumas Kohanim. And in all 3 cases, the Torah goes out of its way to tell me Lo Liskulu Biyadayim. And the Ramban is going to be famous for saying that this halacha, this Isur of Lo Liskulu Biyadayim, is not limited to these 3. The Gemara is going to analyze why the Torah needed to tell me in these 3 cases. But once we have these 3 Isurim, then it applies universally. That's the famous sheet of the Rambam. There may be other poskim who say it's limited to these 3. Okay. This is what I wanted to study with you in the sugyas themselves, the 3 sugyas that we looked at the end of Masechet Yevamot. Now, it's very interesting that in the Encyclopedia Talmudit, which I'm a big fan of, he has 2 different categories under one erech. One is called chinuch, and there's a whole discussion about chinuch, and we derive chinuch from a pasuk in Mishlei. It seems to be that it's an obligation on the father, not clear whether it's on the mother as well. Maybe if there is no father, then it falls onto the mother. Very complicated issues of chinuch. And deriving from a posuk in Mishlei, Hanoch Lenar, the posuk say that's only D'Rabban. Or to use the exact phrase, Midivrei Sofer. And again, if we had 15 hours, we could talk about the difference between D'Rabbanan and Divrei Sofer. Not for us now. Now he goes on to a separate category called Isurim. Because all the cases of Chinuch in Shas all deal with mitzvos aseh. For example, to teach your son Torah, to buy a lulav for your son, to buy a pair of tzitzis for your son, to buy tefillin for your son, sukkah, etc., etc. It's just non-ending. And all the cases, what's common to all of them, is they're all mitzvos aseh. And some say that we derive this from chanoch lenar. Chanoch means, teach him, train him, educate him, raise him to do mitzvahs. And it only applies to mitzvahs. That is one major sheet in the Rishonim, and he codifies it here with all the fantastic Marmakovos on the bottom. But then he gets to a section about Isurim. And he says, as far as Isurim is concerned, we're going to paskin Ein bezlin mitzuvin lafrisho. And if ein bezlin mitzuvin lafrisho, then it doesn't even come on the chinuch. But what are we left with? D'lo lisfa luhu biyadai. And that's going to be an iser doraisa to feed a child nevela. So again, let's just get the structure. We have clear-cut two dinim here. We have one din of chinuch, and that's Divrei Sofer, and that's directed to a mitzvah saseh. As far as Isurim is concerned, we're on a different page entirely. It's not chinuch. It might even be an Isur Doraisa, but it all depends on whether or not the child took the initiative. And the issue is whether you have to stop him and prevent him, take the nevel out of his hands. And we're going to accept the opinion that Ein Bezdin Mitzuvah Lafrisho, so it's not within the parameter of feeding. Or a case where you're feeding him, and that's going to be an Isur, which according to almost all the Shitos except for one, that's a Trumas Hadeshin we'll get to, is an Isur Doraisa to feed your child Nevela. Shkotzim, Dam, Tumas Kohanim, that's explicit in the Torah. That's for sure a Doraisa. The Ramban says we're going to extrapolate and universalize it to all Isurim. The question is, once we do so, we now have expanded the Isur of Liskalu Liyadayim as a Doraisa Isur to include every violation whatsoever, and certainly Nevela would be an excellent example.
Why are we differentiating between assays and looked at?
So if you take a look at the encyclopedia, it has a number of different answers to your question. Let me see if I can find this for you. Yeah, the best thing for me is to go back to the original. Okay. At the beginning of this very, very long piece on Chinuch, it says the following. Anoch lenar al pi darko, etc. And now we go on. He says, also he adds the mitzvah of Talmud Torah is derived from Limanat Mosim Esbene. Pirshu Rishonim, she targilu esbenechem lios asukim tamid b'Torah, etc., etc. Then he says the following. I don't know. I'm going to apologize if you don't find it so easily. If somebody has a printer, we can print this out, and it'll be a lot easier. But anyway, there's a paragraph here that starts Im yesh chiyuv al bezdin. Do you find such a paragraph?
Yeah, it's where the font changes.
Yeah, you have that? He says, Nechleku Rishonim, yesh sovrim cha'af b'koton she'gil lechinuch amru she'ein mitzuvin lehafrisha. Right, in the previous section, which we didn't get a chance to go through, he comes to the conclusion that ein bezdin mitzuvin lehafrisha, and he says that lahazir milavar, to prevent his child from violating an Isur, ein zeh chinuch. Doesn't come under the mitzvah of chinuch. And again, if we're paskening ein bezdin mitzvah lafricho, if the child on his own initiative ate something that's also, you don't have to stop him. Ein bezdin mitzvah lafricho. Ella, what maybe as a father you should be chayv in chinuch? He says no. Because mitzvahs asay, tzrichas hori yoser mi isur lav. Unbelievable. If I were to ask you which is more severe, the violation of a lav or the absence and passive non-fulfillment of a mitzvah, which would you think is more chum?
Depends on if the shiur or the lemon shiur.
If you're trying to teach positive behaviors, that's harder.
Right, but I'm not asking you what's harder.
But no,
I'm not sure what's harder,
we need
but-
to spur the parent to instill in the child positive behaviors.
No, I agree with you, but I'm asking
You
think that
they're not going to eat treif, but it's hard to get them up for minyan in the morning. Right? That's the only
Okay,
proof you need.
I'm going to leave that discussion for you to work out on your own. I wasn't asking which is more difficult. I was asking which is more chamur. You follow?
And that's why what you said is true. The
It
lie
may
is
be
more
more
chamur.
difficult to get my child
That's
up
what
to
he's saying.
minion.
That's what he's saying.
But I think it's a lot worse if my child is eating the vela than if he's not getting up for minion.
No,
And
that's
that's
right.
why it's a lot more likely that he won't get up for meeting in a vela. Because it's almost inbred.
Right, it's like
It's inbred. It's like such a jump.
Because it's
Wow.
more chamur.
But he says the following, that chinuch is only for kiyum mitzvahs, and the purview of chinuch does not extend, the scope doesn't include separating your son from an Isra, which is counterintuitive.
Well, his
He says-
language of
Wait, just give me 1 second, sorry. Avalahazir midlavar ein ze chinuch. Why? Shemitzvahs asay tzrichas hara yoser mi Isra lav, shu b'shevi al taseh. Do you follow what he's saying over here? 520. Who's he quoting? The Trumas Hadeshin. Okay, we'll come back to Trumas Hadeshin, but what the Trumas Hadeshin is saying now, he lived, by the way, more than 5 centuries ago, so it's almost like a Rishon. And he says that in the case of a lav, if the child is eating the vela, for example, I'm just being passive. But in the case of mitzvahs asay, here, I have to get the child to do something that's active, and something that's active is more important than a shevi altas. And then he goes on with another explanation. Says, "Oh, lefisha chovas chinuch tiknu chachamim ke'en shel Torah shechiva es ha'av." Right. So this is what we call the tikkun rabbanon ke'en doraisa tikkun, and the Torah established the mitzvah of milah, pidiyah in the case of a bechor, and limud Torah. And what's common to all these 3 cases where the Torah obligates the father vis-a-vis the son? They're all mitzvah. So we have no biblical source for an obligation incumbent on the father to separate his son from a lotas.
I think the language of that you need to. Or sorry, I moved off.
that's hard.
Yeah, after Mrs. Tzrichas hara yoser Mr. Lav is sort of very reminiscent of Divrei Abbanon Tzrich Mechizuk. Like I don't know they need to read Tzrichas hara yoser as a judgment call about objectively which is worse, as much as Lamaisa you need to do more of a azhara because it's harder to do with the Sheva Altas.
Maybe you're right. In fact, he goes on to ask the question. It's a mission that says you have to train your son to fast on Yom Kippur, depending on what age he is. So l'chora, that's a case of lo taseh. So he says, no, v'nisan is not just say, it's a mitzvah say. But again, you'll see over and over, if you have a chance to go through this, that as far as being obligating the father to be mafresh his son from an Issa when the son is taking the initiative, that we're going to say ain't bezin mitzvah lafrishon. It's not within the parameters of chinuch and the obligation of the father. But as far as lisfu liyadayim, that's already a different story. Then you're feeding him the vela actively. And that's an Isur Doraisa, and it's not just for the father, it's for anyone.
That's what I said. I got as well.
And that's a kuvaseh. So now we have a new category called the low lisfu lubiyadayim. Now, everyone-
So is playing with what, according to this, you wouldn't need to stop.
You wouldn't need to stop. Because that's a low pass. But make sure he gets up for minutes. Lots of low.
Right? You're doing enough of an assay.
Correct. Make sure the children are there for
It seems like the theme is like doing things. the chinuch falls under anything, the action.
I forgot your first.
Here. And in the opinion of Truna Deshan, that it's only mitzvah to set from Kiddushin with Lashi Tov in the heart, which is more Lotal said, like what we do there.
You mean to teach them how to swim? What are you talking
Yeah,
about?
that's
Teach them how to swim. That might be a separate category
That's not-
of
that doesn't
danger.
add up.
I'm saying, but that's in the sugya of 5 mitzvah said, there's Lotal.
I'm not sure I know what you mean by we're talking about
Truna Deshan
saying that's an essay maybe or
like maybe
I don't know.
The second
Okay,
question
that's
the second
something I
question,
have
like when you're saying
have to think.
giving the phone to your kid is
On Shabbos.
No, like in general.
Oh, what's the problem with giving you a phone? I'm not this flew over my head.
How is it so different than an available?
I think you probably talking about internet.
Your mom's giving him like
Smartphones.
Right. So you need a
Kosher phones.
you need
Kosher
a filter, I think.
Okay.
Okay, but both sides, let's move on. Okay, we have this Isur, which it seems is the Raisa that's derived from 3 different psukim, and the Ramban insists that we extrapolate and universalize it to all Isurim of lo lisfuluhu biyadai. Now we have a radical chiddush of the Trumas. I'm going to put this on the side and see if we have these. Which page? Page 2? Page 3. Okay. Again, you're all invited and encouraged to go through the Encyclopedia Talmud. It's some fascinating issues, but we don't have the time for that. Okay. Now, as we read through this Trumas Hadesh, it's a line and a half. I'm going to ask you, put on your thinking caps. Are we dealing with a Doraisa or a Duraban? Take a look. He says the following. Bahada I see crow. He's referring to our Sugya and Yevamot that we saw. That they bring a pasuk, the Asra Torah, the lo lisfilahi lekatan isa biyadayim. Nirali hatam. Rabbi, so when you see the word tam, by association, what does that sound like? A whole area of Jewish thought, which is very, very, what word should I use? Questionable. Amei mitzvahs. We're going to see that Sam Sofer is going to attack the Trumas Hadesh because of that one word, nirali hatam. Who are you to give a tam? That's going to be the Sam Sofer's argument. The kapid rachmana. Why can't I feed the child the vela? Shelo yargil oso lavar averos. He'll get into the shmung of it. Uksheyagdil yevakesh limuda. He's going to try to do it again and again. He got so used to eating that, those cheeseburgers, McDonald's, This is my favorite story when I was in the Rockies. So one of the guides showed us like and the head of a grizzly bear. If you go to Canada in that part, it's all about grizzly bear. If you didn't see a grizzly bear, you want your money back. Anyway, but this one, Baruch Hashem, was showing Geshtar. Okay, so she tells us the story of this grizzly bear.
Don't we say about animal? Vader instead of Jordan?
Whatever you want to say.
No, I thought it was
whatever you want to say. So what happened to this grizzly bear? And they actually killed the grizzly bear. They don't usually kill them. The bear attacked a garbage pail that somebody on a camping thing had left garbage. And in the garbage, there were all sorts of meats and stuff that they had thrown out after barbecue. And the grizzly bear loved the meat. Kept coming back every single night. Finally, the Rangers decided we're going to take this grizzly bear 100 miles away from that campsite. Sure enough, the grizzly bear the next day starts its journey and finds its way back. At the end of the day, they took the grizzly bear 500 miles away. And the grizzly bear went back to the same meat, the same camp. To me, that's a Muslim. But that's what I think the Trumas Hadesh has in mind when he says, Milivudo hergelo. you get the child used to eating the velas, forget it. It's a lost cause. And the Achronim, starting with the Pri Megadim and beyond, they all say that according to this time, we're not dealing with the Doraisa, we're dealing with the Rabbanim. It could be that the Tumas means in the three cases that are explicit and derived from Yalfusis, that's Doraisa. But we're going to extrapolate towards other Isurim, but only on a Rabbanim level, because we're going to analyze the underlying reason and the logic that compels this Isur, and we're going to apply it to other cases where the Torah didn't. The Torah only applied in these three Isurim. One is an Isur Kares, and one is called Tuma, and so forth and so on. But that's the Trumas Hadesh. He writes the following. Okay, so now we get to the Pri Megadim, which is on the bottom of your.
What the point of the Trumas Hadesh, though, also is that you're not doing anything wrong. It's to hold someone else from doing something wrong.
That doesn't make.
So,
Because if I can pick up on what Jeremy's saying, the main question that we want to focus on today, every shiur has like a chakira that's right in the middle of the shiur. Everything's built around. Is with this Isur of lispatial or lispibiyadayim, really, where is the violation? Is it the violation on the part of the father? Let's say it doesn't have to be the father, but the person who's feeding the child. Or is the Isur here generated by the child himself? And what your problem is, and your violation, is that you're facilitating his violation. Can I go over that one more time? Because again, if you catch that, then you have the whole shit. Here's the issue. How do we define the Isur, and we'll see nafkaminis, of the lispulu yadayim? Is it what we call the machayev? Where does the sibas achiv, where does it lie? Where does it begin? What generates this Isur? Is it the avera of the katan? Whoa.
How can it be?
Can the katan have an avera? Okay, let's move on to that.
well, he's not saying, he's saying, well, we're afraid that when he gets older, then he'll.
No, not the Trumas Hadesh. Again, we're going to use the Trumas Hadesh to prove one of the two tzadim. You're already a step ahead of me, but I just want to tell you, by way of introduction to the whole balance of the shiur, what we're going to ask is, where does it lie? Is the avera really because you're feeding him? If you could write down one word, I don't expect you to take notes, but the key word for today is ha'achala, leha'achil, the act of ha'achala, which is like I say, his file, or is it the avera of the katan, and you're a facilitator, making it possible for the katan to violate that avera?
Using the Truma Hadesh, it's not clear, because at that moment in time, he's not over any. Truma Hadesh is concerned, you're going to get him to a point where he's automatically, when he's a gadol, going to be over.
So, but what we're worried about here, according to the Trumas Hadesh, what is motivating us?
We're worried about
The katan. It's the katan, not now, but later. But again, it's the katan. It's the katan's problem here. That's our problem. Our problem is because we're messing it up for the katan. There's nothing inherently wrong, so to speak, with ha'achala. So let's say, for example, according to Trumas Hadesh, we'll see the Pri Megadim in just a second, if you are machil someone, we'll call him X, undefined, but that X is not going to be trained by you to eventually do an avera. Would it be asur? No isur whatsoever. And there's nothing inherently wrong with the achala. The problem with the achala is that on the accepting side, he is now going to possibly be influenced by this situation and the repetition, blah, 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 and therefore he will violate the Isur. Supposing I find someone who will never, ever violate the Isur, or alternatively, someone who's responsible for his own actions, and I was not the one to cause him to violate the Isur. That's what we're going to see in the Pri Megadim. Take a look at the Pri Megadim. He says, "L'das haTrumas Hadesh, Adam sha'anas Yisrael gadol." What happens if I feed nevela to a gadol? Lechol nevela eino bechlal Isur sfia. Why? Because according to Trumas Hadesh, when I play with a katan, and I'm putting him in a situation where who knows what's going to happen in the future, I'm influencing him, and so forth and so on. That's the Isur. But if, let's say, the person is a gadol, and he's responsible morally for his own actions and his own decisions, that's not called lisful yadayim according to the Trumas Hadesh.
Aren't we like kind of going to talk about Aisha Varver? Almost like we're like as close as we've ever been to that issue.
Okay, you guys are really on target. I see. No matter how much I prepare for this year for a full week, I see it's not Morgan. No, you're right. You're gonna have a whole discussion about the ancient Varver, all depending on time. I didn't finish last week's year. That's why I'm going back definitely.
Where's the shlichus?
Okay, we'll get to shlichus. Wait, let's not. If you don't mind, give me a few minutes just to develop this. There's some sofer about this. I have it in small print on page 4 about putting this child into an institution where the child is. So, who is this child? This child is what's called a shoten. Again, we're not trying to be pejorative here. Let's leave out all the politics here, and so forth and so on. Just keep in mind that halachically, legally, this child is excluded from mitzvahs. He's not obligated in mitzvahs. So he says the following: Mashma, this is the Sam Sofer 170 years ago. Mashma divrei Trumas Hadeshen shebeshoter. Would it be an Isur of lisful yadayim to a shoter? Okay, this is going to generate a whole discussion in the Achronim. How do we view a shoter? Will he eventually mature to the point where he becomes chayav mitzvahs? Gigantic issue. If you're interested, there are articles on this in what's called Halacha and Contemporary Society, the RJJ journal. Well, leaving that out for a moment, he says the following: he will not come to Das, and the Trumas Hadesh is saying that the Isur Lisful Yadayim is because we anticipate what is going to happen later on down the line. Mutter Lisful Yadayim. And that I can't accept. We never found in the poskim that we're going to limit the scope of the Isur of the Lisful Yadayim and exclude a shoter. And that's why he says, Ikar, the low Darshin time of the crop. With all due respect to the Trumas Hadeshen, you want to write a book called the Moreh Nevuchim, that's fine, but don't give me a halachic explanation for a doraisa, and then you're going to have mistaken repercussions and decisions. And then he points out that our Gemara in Yevamot, which is the paradigmic case of Lolisvi Yadayim, it's talking about what? A cheresh. The cheresh is like a shoter. According to you, Trumas Hadeshen, the whole Isur Lispi should apply exclusively to a katan, because a katan is also l'chlal mitzvahs, but not to a cheresh and not to a shoter. And again, here's where again the Achronim are going to say, well, no, maybe a cheresh will snap out of it, we'll educate him, and Helen Keller and everything else. Okay, now, Rabosai, I asked you the following question. And here's where I wrote it down on the page, just if you want to take it home and study. What is the nature and the essence of Lisful Yadayim? Two possibilities. One possibility is called Hachsholas HaKodim. You're being machshol the Kodim. And that we saw in the Trumas Hadeshen for sure. No question about it. But now we have to analyze this according to some sofer. That it's a doraisa.
It sounded to me like the Trumas Hadeshen was not concerned about the current Hachshalah, but rather future Hachshalah.
Correct.
But so that to preserve that distinction.
Yeah, we're anticipating what's going to happen in the future. We want to prevent that. So by feeding the katan and training him to eat nevelos, right, you are basically setting up the katan that he will violate Averos in the future.
The monster in the Trumas Hadeshen does not think that if it just happens on its own, that it's any kind of a problem.
Yeah, but that
No. Again, let me go back. Our whole discussion now is based on the assumption that Ein Bezdin Mitzuvin Lafrisha. That if the katan takes his own initiative, we don't have to get involved.
Maybe he'll get used to it.
Yeah.
Maybe we should get involved. He'll get used to it.
Okay, that's a good point.
That's the problem.
But again, the responsibility, so to speak, falls between between the chairs, between the cracks. In other words, it's not that, all of Bezdin and all of Klal Yisrael have to worry about, let the father deal with that issue. But again, now we're up to the Tzam Sofer. According to Tzam Sofer, lo darshin in time in the crop. So what are we left with? We're left with those 3 psukim from which we're going to extrapolate from. And lo sachilu. Okay, now listen to the 2 definitions of the Tzam Sofer. What definition is? Lo sachilu, because the katan, by eating the vela, is violating an avera. Well, maybe I can't go that far, because a katan is potter, so how can you say it's violating an avera? But at least he's capable of what?
Into a Maisa there.
Excellent. Maisa. I love it. I love it. And if we weren't in this crowd, I would come and give you a hug. Because that's what I was looking
We're in that front. Hugs are allowed.
Oh, yeah. I like that. Is that Milo Kodesh to the Zion? Okay, fine. Oh, no, that's exactly what I'm looking for. Maisa Avera. So again, the first definition of the Tzam Sofer is the Torah prohibits you lo sachilum because there's a Maisa. The Katan is capable of a Maisa. And I'm telling you on both sides, if you accept this approach, it has to change your whole attitude from a halachic perspective. That every time Chas Shalom the child does an Avera, that's a Maisa Avera. Okay, the Torah was lenient and compassionate and said we're not going to punish him because he's a Labar Das. But a Maisa Avera he has.
But so we should prevent that. Why are we off the hook? Meaning, why do we take this passive approach? And if it's a
okay, again, you're both asking the same question. You're right.
You're in a tries to prevent somebody from doing this.
But again, maybe getting into again, that's not the Isur sphere. You're talking about, Kol Yisrael Arei Zebazeh. You're talking about a father's love for a child. You're talking about Lifnei Yiver Lo Sitei Mechshol. Again, I'm not, we're going to have to go through a whole gamut. But as far as Lo Lisvu Yadayim, it's because the katan is now he's capable of a Maisa. What's the other shot?
Is it a Maisa Avera?
Well, again, that's going to be, again, depending on how much time we have, that's going to be our discussion today. Is a katan capable of a Maisa Avera? Does the halacha recognize the Maisa of a katan as a Maisa Avera? And to me, that's a mind-boggling issue. But before we get to that, now the second definition of a tzam sofer. Because again, the Tzam Sofer is unwilling to take the approach of timing the crop. So the Torah says, "Lo sachil." Now we get to the other definition. What word did I ask you to make a note of? Hachal. That you are prohibited not only from eating the vela, but from being machil the vela. It's almost as if we have a shutfus here. We have a partnership in the Maisa Avera. It could be the katan is not even capable of a Maisa Avera, but you did a Maisa Avera. What do you mean I did a Maisa? I didn't eat the nevela. But by feeding him the nevela, that's considered a kind of achila. Look, when the Torah says lo sochlu and lo sachilu, and they're both the same. They're both included in Issa Doraisa. And when you feed him, then you have in effect violated the Issa of achila. That's your Isur V'chila.
My something is on you.
Exactly. I come back to my original Chakira. What's the Machayev? Where does it start from? The Isur of Lisful Yadayim. Does it start from the Katan? We saw it for sure in the Chumas Hadeshin. But now we're saying it even in the Tzam Sofer, it could be it's Hachshalas HaKatan. And then we have to institute the principle that a Katan is capable of a Maisa Avera. Well, no. It doesn't start from the Katan. It starts from you. This is what the Torah, again, we don't know why, we don't know how, this is beyond our comprehension, but the Torah says that when you feed him, that's called achila. On your part, you have done an achila. And just one more point, Jeremy, here's where we have a chiddush of the Achiezer of Chaim Ozer Gruzinski from 150 years ago. Well, less than that. But anyway, Chaim also wants to know the following. At what point in time do you violate the Isur of Lisful Yadayim? There's time T1 and time T2. This could be no get all sorts of different questions about Hasra and about Kim Lev the Ravine and all sorts of things. T1 is a moment that you offer the nevela to the child. T2 is the moment that the child eats the nevela. And it could be a time difference. When do you violate the Easter? Well, listen to your diet. Who wants to guess what the Psalm is going to say?
It's like Bishul on Shabbos.
I don't know about Bishul on Shabbos. Leave me alone. I can't. You'll invite me back for a series of about 92 lectures on Bishul on Shabbos. What was up?
It's literally
It's
the heart of the machlokas. If it's a Ma'aseh mitzvah, it's T2. It's T2. If it's hachala, and it's the adult who's now getting involved in this partnership with somebody who doesn't have das, and therefore he is part of the action, then it's T2.
Okay. Listen carefully to what Chaim is saying, and then listen to what the Psalm says. The Chaim is saying something that's totally intuitive, absolutely intuitive. If you're talking about your Aveira, right? Your Aveira, because the Torah says don't eat and don't feed, right? So then it's time T1. If on the other hand it's Hachsholas HaKatar, because of his Aveira, then it's time T2. How many people agree with that?
Well,
Wait, raise your hand. Please, raise your hand if you agree with this. Only one person agrees with that. He's 100% intuitive. Says the Chassam Sofer Pumfaker. The exact opposite is true. Listen to the Chassam Sofer's lot. The Chassam Sofer says the following: that if the Isser is ha'achola, then it's time T2, because it's only when he eats, then it's considered your achila. But if it's hachsholas hakaton, then the very moment that you present him with the nevela, you are already machshel him. You're kind of, again, you have to wait until
but if he doesn't eat it,
Yeah,
but if he
correct.
doesn't eat it.
Correct.
Correct. So it's T1 versus
Shake my hand if I'm not wearing pants. Okay. We're old friends. Maybe. So you hear what I'm saying on both sides? This is the amazing chiddush of the Chassam Sofer. I would never in a million years come up with this chiddush. The Chassam Sofer is saying that if on the one hand, the Isser is ha'achola, correct? So the achola is only at the moment that it's eaten. The child's achil is my achil. But if on the other hand it's hachshola, then of course, Tzvi is right 100%. We have to wait until the child eats to make sure that you were violating the hachshol. But you violated the hachshol from time T1 when you made it feasible and you facilitated his hachshol. Unbelievable finish.
That's what I'm saying about
I'll tell you what I saw some so fair. Whoa, I went up to the heavens. It was like Mamish Vein Olam. You can make a portion of Birchas Hanenim on this so.
He's not making this distinction. His view of Akshala is not that there was a nice idea of the child. It's that his distinction is the Isser, you get eaten as an Isser on you, or you causing him to do something. Not that the Maisa Avera is the Maisa Avera of the child.
So does a child have a Maisa?
I mean, in both,
that's
that's
my
point.
Because if you're going to say I'm being actual child, where's the Maisa Avera?
Both interpretations of the Chassam Sofer is not reliant on the Maisa Avera. They're both reliant on the father.
Well, again, if you're going to call it a Hachshola, correct? So what's Hachshola unless he has a Maisa Avera? And that's what Chassam Sofer and the Pri Megadim and all the Achronim say that a cotton has a Maisa Avera. Where did they derive it from? You can't walk out of here and say, "Oh, Berzon said that a cotton has a Maisa Avera." You're going to laugh at me. So what's the source for this radical conclusion that a cotton is capable of a Maisa Avera? Which again, in my mind, it changes my whole attitude towards a cotton.
Why do you assume that if there's no Maisa Avera, there's no nichshol?
Because a nichshal means he was guilty of a Maisa Avera. That's what the word nichshal means. He was nichshal.
I don't understand why you make that assumption.
Well, what does it mean nichshal? It's not a Maisa Avera.
something that's happening later
It's
on.
education.
Yeah, but we're doing the priceless now, Rabbi. Leave Trumas Hadesha on the side because you're right. The Trumas Hadesha is talking about educational responsibilities and what's going to happen, and we train them this way, train them that way. Now we're dealing with the Toraisa.
Well, we have
The
to be
Torah
right.
is saying, don't feed the child. What does that mean, don't feed the child? So the Sofer goes back and forth. It means don't feed the child because you're being machshel the child, or don't feed the child because the Torah says don't feed the child. And when you feed the child, that's an extension of your a brand new category. And I say that the nafkaminas give me that time difference. But again, in the light of the Sam Sofer, all those other nafkaminas that we derive from the Trumas Hadesha all go down the wayside. What the Prima Godim says that if you're ma'anis a gadol, right? Okay, so wait a minute. If you're ma'anis a gadol, so then it would depend on these two definitions, right? If you're ma'anis a gadol to eat nevela, then if you're going to say that it's my ha'chala, then I violate the Issa. If you're going to say that I'm being machshel him, well, he's a big boy. And when we spoke about a cheresh, so once again, if you're saying that it's the ma'isa vera of a katan, and if I'm being machshel him, then that could apply. If you say that a cheresh is capable of a ma'isa vera. If on the other hand you're being machil him is considered your achila, that would also apply to a cheresh. So that those are the nafkaminas. But here we come to a very interesting point. Where is the source from which we could derive that a cotton has a ma'isa? So I was in the shiur in Rav Soloveitchik's class for Masechet Yevamot, but I looked through the notes and I couldn't find it. So I called up my good buddy Rabbi Chaim Milson, and he heard the shiur in Sanhedrin. And he actually sent me a little bit of his notes here, which I haven't, I think you'll see it on page 5. Let's see. Yeah. I call him the Grach. Grach means Reb Chaim, his name is Reb Chaim Leib also. So I was hoping Daniel would be here today, but because he's okay. So the Rav, Zichron Levrach in the Shiurim, quotes a Gemara in Sanhedrin. This is an unbelievable case. It's what's called sodomy in fancy English, but sodomy between an animal and a katan. And the Gemara says we have to put the animal to death. Right? That's called a chiv skila. And in the Gemara's language, it's called takol. There are two different dimensions to putting an animal to death. In a case of sexual offense, or whatever you want to call it. One is called takola, that's one term, and the other is called kalon. Kalon has to do with, people will walk around and say, oh, that person had a relationship with an animal and so forth. Anyway, for that you have to really go through the sugi inside. But the Gemara says that mezid to katan, if a katan, has a relation with an animal, yesh takol. And therefore we're going to put the animal to death. But when the Gemara goes ahead and says yesh takola, so you might want to ask, well, if there's a takola here and the child is guilty for this sexual offense, then why don't we put the child to death? And Rachmanahu dechasal, right? The Shas used the fact that the Torah had compassion on the katan. What do you see from this? Rav Soloveitchik derives a radical conclusion from this. That a katan is capable of a ma'isa vera. Again, Rachmanu dechasale, and he won't be punished, but he's capable of a ma'isa vera. The halacha recognizes and validates his ma'isa vera, if you can use that term. And therefore, Rav Soloveitchik had a question on his grandfather, Reb Chaim. Reb Chaim also came to the conclusion that a katan has a ma'isa vera, but Reb Chaim relied on the Rambam. The Rambam in Perkei Aleph Milchus Isurei Bia, and the Ravid yells Haramba here. The Rambam paskins that if a katan ben tes, he's 9 years old, he has a relationship with what's called a shivka charufa, he has to bring a korban to be machaper. So Chaim said, what do you mean? He's a katan, he's 9 years old. Okay, so we recognize his bia. He's royal bia, he's the ben tes. But where's the ma'isa vera? Why does he need a kapara? Which is exactly the Ravid's point. The Ravid says, how could this be? Oh, I'm sorry, it's a Perek Gimel Milchus Subi. I said, Ben Tesh Shonim Yomechet Shabal Shivcha Charufa, and he Loka, like the Shivcha gets Malchus, for who may be Karma. And the Ravid said, how is that possible? So the Rav pointed out, I don't know why Reb Chaim had to stretch his arm out to the Rambam in Shivcha Charufa. He could have proved it from the Gemara of Yeshua Takola in the case of Skilas Abehema. But then Reb Chaim had another proof. And this is from the Hagos Hashri. Now listen to this. The Gemara tells us in Bava Kam, I think it's Tzadi Ches, that Rafram burned someone's shtarcho. And the Gemara says, according to the Hagos Hashri, his interpretation, that when he became a gadol, the Nizak, the owner of the shtar, was tovea him in Bezdin, and they forced him to pay up. But when did he do the Maaseh Hezek? When he was a katan. So you see that the Maaseh Hezek of a katan is considered a Maaseh Hezek. It's machai of him, just that we can't force him to pay because he's a katan. When he becomes a gadol, we can sue him in a court of law and he'll have to pay. So these are some of the rayos that we have to prove that a katan's action is considered an action. It's Adam. Did you want to say something?
I was going to ask if we could read the notes in the second part inside.
Yeah. Okay, Nira, there.
Yeah, I just.
Oh, the lav dafka. Oh, that's a beautiful piece. How are we doing on the clock? Okay, not too great. But let me see if I can add just one piece here, and then we'll say a quick. Rav Soloveitchik says the following: if our two proofs to establish that a katan is capable of a ma'aseh avera are A, from the case of Takola, Sanhedrin and Hay, B, from the case of katan abol shivcha charufa, maybe there's no proof at all. Why? We have a principle called misasek b'chalovim v'arayis chayiv shekeinen. No, so there's a special category of hanoas haguf, which is more chamur, and you get punished for hanoas haguf even in case of misasek. So maybe in these two cases, says Rav Soloveitchik, there's an exception to the rule, because both of these cases, the shekeinen, the katan has hanoah from the shivcha charufa, and never from the active side. So Rav says, no. You can't be mechayev someone for shekeinen without a ma'aseh avera. So the very fact that he had hanoah, if it's linked up with the fact that there was a ma'aseh avera, then you could say shekeinen. But there's got to be a ma'aseh. And then we have the proof from the Zikin. Again, whether the proof from the Zikin is full proof or not, I don't know. Okay, Rabbi, I just wanted to share with you one quick idea before we close. If anyone wants to ask questions, I'll be around.
Can I just make one comment?
Yes.
It all comes from the original phrase that we had in the Gemara, which was Hazar Gidol Alachanim. And I would suggest maybe it depends how you read that, those four words. Hazar Gidolim Alachanim. Or Hazar Gidol Alachanim.
Excellent. Okay, very good. You have the whole shiur down pat. Here's what I wanted to share with you. An idea with regard to Bikurim. Very interesting that the Mishnah tells us in the third parak of Bikurim, commenting on the pasuk v'lakachta merishis kol pri hadoma v'samta batena v'lokach hakohen hatena miyodecha. The question is the tena, which is the vessel within which a person brings his bikurim, is that part of the matana, the gift that he gives to the kohen. And Mishnah says the following: Ha'ashirim, the rich people, hayu meviim bikureim bekalsos shel kesef v'zahav. They could afford it, and they brought their bikurim in silver and gold vessels. Haniyim, they used to take our rova branches and make baskets out of them. And the Mishnah goes on to say the following: that in the case of the, okay, Chaim, I'm going to ask you because you have a good sense of intuition. Which of the two cases, the Aniyim or the Achiv, are we going to require of him to give it and leave it with the Kohen? What would be your intuitive answer? But you
I would
don't
say
answer-
the- no, I'd say the usher.
wrong.
To the usher.
The usher, you'd say, would have to leave it. I mean, it's worth something, right? The Nitzara, the Salshal Nitzara is worth it. And the Mishnah says, take it from the Aniyim and not from the usher. Why? So the Malbim, in a commentary on Sefer Dvarim in Parshas Kitavo, says the following. He says it's more precious, the eyes of the Rebbeinu Shalom. The Salshal Nitzar, the Aniyim had to work very hard. Start with Rava and they had to peel it and this and that. Until the Ashirim, easy come, easy go. And the Malbim says that's going to be our attitude towards the study of Torah. If Torah is easy for you, if it's not challenging, okay, it's important. It's, kesef and so. But what's more important, says the Malbim, is Amelus B'Torah, when you're willing to really put yourself out. So I just want to wish everyone, and thank you, because I know that you've got a lot of things on your plate, and if you take time for learning Torah, that's really Amelus B'Torah, and we should be talking with Hashem, all the prophets, the Via Bikurim, Ken Yiratz.
This week's parsha, Adam Kiyam well.
Correct. Name is Atzma Ba'al.
So every month,
Absolutely.
That's why you don't pay Rabbi money.
No, we have to, Alan, we have to prepare for the back group too. I don't have any, so what would you cost me, the kids, and what age? Come on, you have waited, what about wait, I have a.
Did you give your daughter money to buy the?
Yeah, you gave the daughter.
Did you actually buy it for her, or did you just give the money?
Let her steal it.
No, but
So, I always have an issue, my kids, they want to eat, Halabi, sorry. So what age? No?
That's the Rabban. Everybody agrees that
What
age
age?
is the two.
But if
Even
you started
Igil,
saying-
Even at
as long
12
as
years old,
A minute later?
It's only the Rabban.
that depends on whether you.
Again, technically, you could ask, what is your name, buddy?
Make it in Dutch.
Dutch, you mean 1 minute?
Does anybody know how to turn that off?
Yeah,
One
in the 6-year-old.
One of my. Is the white.
You have to press the button.
Stop. Stop.
So they finished it. Sitting on the table.
I had the same thing, I grew up for 3 hours. I got to yeshiva, got all started asking around, uncles, grandfather, no, we keep 5, why did my father keep 3? Because